Ready?
I feel like cats are always ready. Um, so, hello everyone. I'm gonna just start by saying this is Helen Boyd, and this is the second interview in this project that I have undertaken, for good or ill. I'm excited about it. And of course, this series would not be complete. I figured if I'm gonna name a series Shoulders of Giants, my first two interviews are James Green and Kate Bornstein. So, Kate and I have known each other for a long time now. Um, let's just go with a long time now. And honestly, you are one of my very favorite people. Aside from the cuteness, all the brilliance, all the writing, all the boldness, all the everything that you bring. Um, and I also wanted to add one caveat, and this is a little educational linguistic anthropology for you all, but I am very much a New Yorker. And we express enthusiasm by being interruptive and talking and listening at the same time. Zoom does not allow that really in person. It's a different experience. So I'm going to do my very best, but the reality is I also know that Kate is always inspiring and exciting and fun to talk to. So just want to put that out there for those of you who don't understand New Yorkers, that this is part of the thing. Believe me, I've been living in the Midwest for 15 years and I still have not broken the habit. So um, anyway, and Kate, you wanted to add your own.
I do. I have a speaking caveat as well. Um, I was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2012 and got 2 years of chemotherapy. And since 2014, I'm good. It's gone. I'm healed. But what it left is a phenomenon called chemo brain, which really fucks you up and makes you a little bit crazy. On top of that, I got myself long COVID, and that also fucks me up and makes me lose things. What's more, I am 76 years old. And boy, oh boy, it's true what they say. You lose things. I lose words. Um, and I gotta say, you're one of my favorite people. Your gallantry always takes my breath away.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We've been also, I'm sure that will come up, but talking about my own gender and the sort of what I call the contact high of working in transness. It's been 20 years for me, and the notion that that you can't work for trans people and not sort of have to liberate your own gender in certain ways as well. Um, and that's one of the reasons that, I mean, gender outlaw, let's start at the beginning, blew my mind. And I know that there's a million other people, because I know, honestly, when you were going through that cancer scare and the GoFundMe went up, I remember you being surprised at the love and devotion of all of your readers. But the reality is there's a whole generation of people that Gender Outlaw just, it lit the whole house of gender on fire for so many of us. So I would love to just ask you first about that work and how it came to be, because that's the first, right, of the.
It was early on. Um, there were a whole lot of us talking about, well, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I don't know really, I'm supposed to go this way, I'm supposed to go that way. And I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't get it into words. And my whole life now, all my writing life, my best writing has come from what I've done on stage. First, I put it on stage, and then it seems I can essayify it. And I did a play called Hidden Agenda, and it was a goofy fucking play. It was, Marx Brothers, and
Funny.
it, it was goofy. But it was my first attempt to say neither nor. And having done that play and having toured that play for a couple of years, and worked with the likes of Mixed Justin Vivian Bond and our conversations late into the night, I was able to pull out some essays um, with the help of my editor from Routledge. So
Awesome. Those works, I mean, it's always fascinating talking to James too. And I'm also just realizing that, of course, the first two people I'm interviewing are also writers. That's probably not an accident. Um, the notion that like so much, trying to explain the pre-internet days I teach 18-year-olds, that, when you got your hands on a book, and this the lovely tradition. I had a queer friend years ago who went on to transition, um, who handed me, a copy of Stone Butch Blues inscribed, right? So, and how much that tradition was the case. Either someone in your life who handed you a book to go, would you stop asking me dumb questions? Alternately, people who are handing you books to go, this might be helpful in a gentle sort of way. So, I have no doubt that Gender Outlaw has been handed off to many, many people. Have a whole other project in mind. And thank you for mentioning Mixed Justin Bond. One of the other things that I'm hoping these interviews bring up are all the other people. There's so many people. There's so many of the sort of small group. Um, at some point, I was talking to an editor friend, Tom Legere, if you know him, who started a trans press back in the day, and he was being accused of like only having a cadre of trans people. And at some point he went, look, there were like 25 of us at the time. It was like, we're not trying to keep anybody out. It's just we all know each other because there were like
geez.
25 of us at the time. So I was going to say, in your era, which precedes mine, that is part of the series, what were there, like 5 people? So
I was going to say six, but I was being generous. Yeah, yeah, probably five.
that's awesome.
Oh,
Who do you think of as your peers, at least in terms of doing the work at the same time that you were initially doing it?
first comes to mind is Les Feinberg. Um, we joked about being dad and mom for many trans and what are now called non-binary folks. Non-binary wasn't the word back then. James is a peer. Um, Mixed Bond is a peer.
Yeah,
Holly Hughes, but Holly Hughes is a dyke, pure and simple, and enjoys that. Um, it looks like we scared away my cat with all this talk. So, huh,
there's nothing worse than the cat just being like, "I'm sorry, you've disturbed my environment, and I need to go now." They Irish goodbye better than maybe it should call the feline goodbye at this
oh,
point. Oh wait,
oh, oh, oh,
I know you've got
hello,
timeshares happening.
hello, Bert.
His name is Bert. He looks like a Bert. Yeah. So in figuring out what it was like. I mean, the movement that I certainly came into in the early aughts was already established, and there were people doing all sorts of things first. Laws had been passed, etc. Um, but the wilderness of it. What do you think of as your first sort of moment of outreach or education or activism when it came to gender? I'm not going to say transness, but gender.
Someone reaching out to me or me reaching out to somebody?
The first time that you like made yourself publicly known as someone who was doing work on gender.
Okay, now remember that thing I told you about
Okay,
the
my students
brain?
occasionally just yell, rephrase.
No, I can actually have an answer for that, but it it startled me that I did.
Okay.
Um, I was a writer for a paper called the Bay Area Reporter in San Francisco,
Mhm.
and it was like $10 an article, uh, no matter the length. And my beat was it was art and social whoopee. Uh, I was Kirky Sherwood Forrest, if you remember her. Um, just doing pleasant things. And then it was Hidden Agenda, the play. That was the first boom. Uh, I'm writing that. I'm talking about that. Earlier than that, I reached out to a group. I was asked to speak at a women in theater group, and I talked about not man, not woman, and gender as performance. And I was just trying to figure it out at that time. Um, it got me in a lot of trouble with the women in theater group. So,
Yes, and I think you tell that story in Gender Outlaw, the first resistance to sort of trans identity, or yes, gender.
really,
I feel like that's maybe I know that story from somewhere else, which is possible.
I
Again,
think
I was
it's
gonna
in
say
a book.
I'm doing perimenopause, so I'll add that
Oh,
caveat.
okay, okay, okay.
Where I remember something from sometimes is unclear. Those citations are important, but I'll check it.
I
Um,
think it was from a book called Queer and Pleasant Danger, which is
oh,
my memoir. And I do tell that story in great detail in that.
see, there you go. Okay, so it's the beginnings, and this is of course I always hate asking anyone about this, but I feel like this I can't not ask it. This is a problem that is still with us, right? Of course, the resistance from certain kinds of women's groups to trans and non-binary genders. Um, I know we've talked about TERFs before. I know they make us both sad.
I know that what we're calling trans excluding radical feminists like to think of themselves as gender critical. And I figure if we like to have ourselves called by a name, then it's only fair to call them by a name and call them gender critical. And they began the idea that transgender identity, transgender culture, uh, transgender people is all part of an ideology. And that got steam in the UK and with gender criticals, and it's taken root here. Hey, 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 no.
I'll take a moment to say also there's some lovely etiquette being taught by Kate. If people want to be called a thing, then call them the thing, even if you want to call them all sorts of other things. I think sometimes, especially when you want to call them all sorts of other things, it might be important to recognize that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes, the gender critical. I think I came out of feminist movement. I was a graduate student in the 90s, and so I was reading simultaneously a lot of the traditional feminist works. There's some of the ecofeminism that's very about women and gender and femininity all being very bodily based, right? And so it's like I got it, but at the same time, Judith Butler, tosses gender trouble out there, and it really so complicated the mix. And I feel like it's been, at least for me, that's when it feels like two sides. But I have a funny feeling that the gender critical mission started much before that, frankly, in the 80s, I'm guessing, with Sandy Stone, etc. So how do you feel about that movement now? I mean, that's it's ongoing, it's gotten bigger. I think it's gotten bigger.
It's gotten really powerful in UK, and that seems to be worldwide central headquarters, and that would include J.K. Rowling, um, whose work I adore. I am such a Harry Potter fan. I have a tattoo in the back of my hand. I must not tell lies, which I got at when I started writing my memoir because I gotta remember that. I gotta remember that. And I told lies anyway in the book. You may
Yes,
not.
of course.
Well,
I mean, any good storyteller, right? There's always some lying to sort of make up for memory lapses and also maybe to just make the story a little better. Um, right? That's part of
yeah.
the
Mark Twain called them stretchers.
sure, sure. And my God, yeah, master storyteller of the US by a long shot. Um,
Yeah,
the
oh,
the
and Sandy Stone. How could I have forgotten? She was a mentor.
oh
Uh,
yes,
yeah,
and she has said yes too, so I'm very excited because
you totally want that. You
we have
totally
never
want
met,
that.
but I because I came to this stuff by a theory, right? I mean, I was coming out of grad or had read all this stuff in grad school, so Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto and her work on The Empire Strikes Back with Sandy Stone are significant, but it was not for me, that was not part of lived experience, right? That was part of like the theory that I inherited and had to catch up on at a certain moment in time. And yeah, it's that the J.K. Rowling phenomenon is so terrible. I used to have trans students who would say that when they came to the university I work at, they felt like they were at Hogwarts, and for the summer they would have to go back to Privet Drive. And it was such a perfect metaphor for people who couldn't be out at home, and then she becomes this disaster.
I keep the work separate. The you know she gave a wonderful gift to the world with those, and I would really I came this close to sitting down and talking with her, and at the last moment, a friend of a friend said, "No, no, no, it's not going to work out." Would have liked to have engaged with her. I think we could have found a lot of points of agreement, which would have outweighed the points of disagreement. And I
Yeah,
think often that's the best you can hope for. And that's not even bad, so you don't agree on one point. Okay, okay. So you think that biology is the root of it and biology establishes identity, right? That's true. In, and it has been true for thousands and thousands of years. I would look at the same phenomenon saying, okay, there's biology, then there's what we think about biology. And that's also true. Now, what you've got is called sex, what I've got is called gender. But but it doesn't mean I have to hate you or you have to hate me.
yeah, it's stunning to me, I think, to hear any feminist kind of assert that biology is destiny. I mean, this is sort of again 90s activism at a certain moment in time where you go, biology is not destiny was one of the big slogans, right? Specifically in the pro-choice movement. And so when I hear gender critical feminists sort of use that same kind of idea, it's like, you guys know this is a very slippery slope, right? I mean, if we define gender as biological, but also then it's like there's plenty of examples of biology being its weird, strange self, right? A lot of variation, a lot of complications.
Well, you can prove that biology is the basis of sex, and you
Yes.
can prove it with mid-century, mid 20th century science. Anything later than mid 20th century science, you can't prove that anymore. That's when science starts going, oh yeah, it's really gray in there. Um, but people who are insisting on biology as destiny are using mid 20th century science to prove it and go, okay.
Yeah, I remember having that conversation with someone where I just said, it's been like 40 years, right? Wait, do we know that it's been 40 years? Like, the theory has all, never mind. Okay, if you haven't kept up, maybe you have some reading to do. But amazing because when I'm in certain feminist circles, that's still the case where I'm like, wait, you guys really have reading to catch up. Like maybe you're not understanding. Anyway, never mind. Um, to think about that too as well, the resistance, and I know we've seen this before. I always think of the moment in time when, say, Women Against Pornography, right, we're working with the right wing, and I'm like, it's always weird to see those kind of odd bedfellows happen when you're
That's
involved.
happening. That's happening in UK.
Yeah,
The gender critical movement has hooked up with the conservative, the Tories over there, and the press. A lot of the press is backing them, and you go, wait, what? What?
yeah,
And they just don't understand that at
yeah. And I
all.
think poor Stephen Whittle. Anyway, just watching all that happen, imagine for the incredible work that he's done. Um, and honestly, wrote a classic essay on being on the same side, trans feminisms, and yeah. But anyway,
And
again,
Roz Caveney, you want to get her as well.
yes, yes, yeah,
You really do. Up, we're back. Kitty butt.
awesome. She's a beauty. Okay, so in thinking about that, I want to sort of move us a little bit forward. So I have to ask you about the Phil Donahue show
Forward.
because
Okay.
oh,
I
the
moved a
Phil,
little bit forward.
uh, uh,
Oh,
and I fell for that. I fell
you
for that.
did. You
Yeah.
did.
um, the notion. I just want to hear about the Phil Donahue show because I feel like that's sort of an era, first of all, where we didn't have this completely divided, complicated media. There were what I think 5 channels in New York, so which was a lot compared to other places in the country. Well, how did that happen? How did you end up doing that?
There was a circuit. And once you got on one show, producers of one show talked with producers of other shows. And I got on Geraldo at first. Geraldo Rivera
Mm.
was my very first TV talk show. And that was because it wasn't Gender Outlaw. No, it was Hidden Agenda and some some newspaper articles. And Geraldo producer reached out to me for a show that, what was it called? Transsexual Regrets. Who's sorry now? And
Whew.
it was about what we're now calling detransitioning trans women. And uh and two of us hadn't who were kind of happy with it all. Uh and three very upset detransitioned trans women. Um, and I had a breakout moment when an audience member asked me, "Can I have orgasms with my new vagina?" And I came up with the line off the top of my head. And I said, "Yep, the plumbing works, and so does the electricity." And yeah, go ahead, pal. Get out of my ear. Um, and then I started hopping around from talk show to talk show, eventually ending up on Phil Donahue, who was the king of talk shows at that time. Uh, Oprah was the queen and about to overtake him. But Phil Donahue invited me and my partner David, who was still Catherine at the time, and it was about transsexual lesbians and their partners. That's what it was. And I was talking about my daughter and in Scientology. And the reason I kind of brought that up was hopefully getting the word out that she might reach out and say hello and what the fuck. And so I talked about that. And at one point, Bill says, "Oh yes, we've got a question here." And a woman raises her hand, and she stood up. I can still see the rage on her face. How dare you bring a child into this world knowing what you are? And I just started crying, you know, and
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
was that for about 10 or 15 minutes. 10 or 15 minutes later, Phil was walking through the audience, bringing his mic up to people, and he walked behind this woman and whoops, dropped his microphone right on her head. He'd never done that before. He said, "I've never done that before."
He
I
struck me
love you,
as a
Phil
good dude.
Donahue, to this fucking day. Yeah,
Yeah, that's lovely. That's such old school anti-bullying, right? It's like you trip with your milk in the cafeteria just to hit the kid who's been fucking with your friend. I mean, it, that's lovely.
that's a
So,
good one. That's a good one.
um,
Interesting about that show. At the very end, um, the credits start to roll, and David says, talking about all this transgender thing, I think I have a question about my own gender. I think I might be a man." I went, the fuck? He'd never told me that. And so that started a whole other journey in my life.
yes. You were actually one of the people who made me feel better when I was first doing the work too. I would talk about the fact that I was a very enthusiastic girlfriend of what we called a cross dresser at the time. And then once Rachel wanted to wear denim skirts and not, PVC for our club nights out, I was like, I don't know that I'm as into this. Like, I don't. And you were the one who
Right.
said, well, I don't think I could go through transition with a partner. And I went, wait, I'm sorry. Can you just like tattoo that on my head for other people? Because I was so like simultaneously so criticized for like not being like, yes, of course my wife should transition. And it's still an experience that partners had, that expressing any grief or frustration or whatever, it's like you're still kind of given the message, get on board or get out. For a lot of partners, frankly, that's still the case. And you were the person who said that. And I was like, after that, I would just say, look, Kate Bornstein says people just to go,
Well, this all comes down to our notion of gender as inherently real and unchanging, and that once you're a this, you're always a this, and there's no changing it. And everybody's gender is changing all the time. We make slight tweaks. Everybody makes slight tweaks. Look at your hair. Look at my hair. That's a change in gender expression. Gender expression is part of gender. Uh, we change our expression of gender because of our ideas of gender. We see someone else doing something, we go, I like that. And we own that. And we pull that in. Or I wish I had hair like that. We try and we see what we get with that. Uh, but to this day, most of us, and in unguarded moments, I believe that, okay, this is a girl cat. It's always gonna be a girl cat. And frankly, she's She's kind of like you.
Fair. Yeah, we'll leave anyone watching. You can work that out on your own time. What exactly that means. But yes, so uh well, and all cats are tomboys, right? So all female cats are tomboys. They're the tough ones. They're the hunters. So sometimes I think our human construction of gender is where it's limited. Animals have a very different, like they just exist outside of gender in some roles, and yet have very specific sex roles at least. Um, some animals, let me caveat all of everything I just said.
So Joan Roughgarden, what's her book?
Evolution's Rainbow.
Thank you. It's a book like this thick, about 3, 4 inches thick, of the splendor of gender roles that don't exist, that continually get broken in all of nature's glory. And you go, okay, so
Yeah, that's, I mean,
humanity's just catching up to the rest of the planet that
that's
way.
that's a remarkable work. There's also a really amazing period where, of course, the lesbian seagull of the 70s, right? The fact that people did observe same-sex behavior at the very least, and gendered GNC non-binary existence in animals, but they weren't allowed to publish any of that. So were there gatekeepers to what kind of knowledge we had of the animal kingdom, which I think is yes. So um, I always say to people, there's a lot of things that are natural that are bad for you. Assuming that something is closer to nature does not necessarily mean it's healthy, right? They're two different worlds. Um, Plenty of toxins found in nature, right? Plenty of dangerous things, um, but again, I felt like I came into like the feminist movement when it was all like kumbaya hippie stuff, and as you can imagine, the very first room I walked into of like that sort of feminist gathering, because I was like, I had just taken a class on women writers. I was kind of coming to consciousness in terms of feminism. And I walk into this room with my shaved head and my basically equivalent of cargo shorts and combat boots. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, this isn't going to work out. I literally like turned on my heel and walked back out of the room. It's like, we're not holding hands and singing. I'm going to go back to my punk rock scene on the East Village because
Now,
shit.
see, my partner Barbara had the exact opposite experience. She heard there was going to be this amazing, like, feminist get lesbian gathering, and she wanted to go. And so she got herself all dressed up. She was Barbie and just like fabulous, and walked in there completely fabulous. And there were all the shaved heads and combat boots. Went,
Sorry.
uh-oh. And
Wrong scene. It's amazing even within, I mean, I've always said that I think queer culture provides for more versions of gender. More genders are always apparent, right, in a queer gathering than they are in straight culture, mainstream society for the most part. But the reality is there's always criticism from within as well. So yeah, the notion that feminist movement was like, we don't want your angry punk rock thing, or on the same turn. I know certainly a lot of femme lesbians had to deal with the rejection from the larger one once there became like sort of a uniform of what a lesbian looked like, that a lot of femmes really had a hard time
yeah, Barbara
feeling
was
accepted.
was one of those. Yeah.
Well, and Minnie Bruce Pratt wrote about that as well, right? The experience of sort of their relationship and how they both did gender individually and as a couple. Another person who was important to me just because there were so few partners visible anywhere when I showed up. So and frankly, there's still very few. Yeah.
In the early and mid 90s, there was a community in Seattle of leather dykes. And that's where you could let your femme flag fly. And it was totally welcome. And you could be as girly girl as you wanted to be. Uh,
Because it was appreciated.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There were butches and there were femmes. And there were some people who were neither, and that was not laughed at or anything. They were just, wow, what about that? That was odd, but
Yeah. Well,
it,
and
it
the visibility and who was visible, I think that's always been sort of a question mark there, right? Butches are going to be visible in a way that femmes perhaps are not, and that comes with two sides of the coin. So I feel like we brought up Butches, and we can't not talk about Bear Bergman now, because Butches and Noun is another one of those books, and I'm going to hopefully convince him as well. Um, but the experience, I know you two work together on. Oosh, now I'm having my moment. The book that you two worked together on, edited. There was a new anthology.
oh, Gender Outlaws, Next Generation.
Thank you. Um, Amazing. Also an amazing work.
I
Um,
know it's a lovely book.
yeah, it really is. So I'm hoping as well to do that interview. How did you two meet? How did you meet Bear? I knew there was a story there. I knew it.
In, in
Tell us
the
what you can tell
early
us. I'll go with that.
90s,
So tell us what you can
in
tell
the
us. You don't know.
early 90s, I was I was on America Online. America Online was uh,
Yeah.
a gateway to the internet where the internet, the World Wide Web, and if you had a modem, you could plug it into your phone line and get onto the World Wide Web with a special interface, and the interface was rooms. You had little rooms you could go into, and you could be anything you wanted to be. You could play act, you could cosplay, and so you'd go into one room and you'd be a lumberjack, and you go into another room and you could be a damsel in distress. And I was having all this fun going into all these rooms, there's all these things. And I went into this one room, and it was called Smoke Filled Bar or something like that. And walked in, and I was the lady in red. And there was James Bond. And it was all text based, remember, all text based.
Yes. Oh.
And the flirtation,
Mm.
the sexy, sexy flirtation. Oh my God. Oh, it was great joy. It was like you're living your it was porn. You're living your own porn dream, and your own fantasies right there, text based with someone else. And James was, ah, just fabulous. And it turned out to be a 14-year-old Bear Bergman.
Why I should not really even be a little surprised by that, but it's still amazing. That's an amazing story.
I mean, holy shit.
Yeah, that
What the fuck? You were 14? Didn't know that till years later when we
well, I was
finally
gonna say if there's a definition of
heard
an old
some
soul, if there's a definition of an old soul, Bear is definitely in that category. So if we even say that sort of thing,
there.
yeah,
There's a dear, dear heart.
just
Yeah.
sweet and kind in ways that regularly blow my mind. Still, just a constant also inspiration for being more of a mensch, I would say, right? More kind, more generous, more especially with the people who hate you the most. Yeah, he's an inspiration on that front. So
He's a
um
mensch, he's a bloke. Yeah.
yes. And a parent too. So now it's exciting. Now I have lost I was like, I'm so overwhelmed with watching you blush telling that story that I don't even know what my next question is. You've tied my tongue a little bit. Um, but I love that story. So that's another part of it that I will say that when I first came into it, there was a lot of trans movement that was very like, we don't talk about sexuality, right? Because it was so difficult to get people to understand that, confused by that, understand that transness was about gender and it wasn't about sexuality per se, maybe kind of sort of. But I felt like so much of the messaging we certainly got early on was like, this isn't about sexuality. And I was like, yeah, but I'm in a relationship with a person. So we kind of have to talk about sexuality. And I'm wondering if you experienced that, because I know you have been involved in so many other kinds of scenes that are pro-sex or sex positive or whatever word we're using these days. Um, that if you ever sort of experience that in larger trans movement.
There was a, what was it called? Oh, Jesus. What's the word for you're not really trans, you're, it's a fantasy you've got, and that's really all it is it's based in a fantasy.
The autogynephilia theory.
That's it, autogynephilia.
Yeah.
And my God, when I first heard of it, I went, yeah, sure, okay, me. And why not? Why can't sex be a kicking off point for future exploration and a touchstone for an identity that blossoms, that includes and goes far beyond that? But no, 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 no. You, you mustn't talk about our fantasies. Fuck you.
I know, it's just as if sex is not some kind of important driving force in human existence, right? As if
Yeah.
it's we always, I mean, this is what I got into it with at the time that cross-dressing community about, because I was like, what if it is about sex? Like, bring it down. It's like, it's okay. There's a lot of things. There's a whole movement of gays and lesbians who are gaining liberation because of sexuality. Like, this is about sexuality. Why are we quashing it when
Because
everyone,
we're gender, we are far superior to sexuality. That's over there.
yeah.
And that provided the wedge that's in the door now. And again, in UK, their big group, is it called Stonewall? I think it is. Um, a large number of lesbians and gay men have dropped out of Stonewall because of so much focus on transgender, and that's not us. It's a movement about sexuality, not gender. And you go,
Really?
your sexuality choice is based on what gender your partner is. Hello. Um,
It's a gender issue, yes. It becomes a gender issue once you want to engage with another person or identify yourself as being attracted to one gender specifically, right? So yeah, it's very frustrating, but the prudishness especially, I have always found fascinating. And I get that some of that is about the messaging, and I also get that it's for some people that sexuality had nothing to do with the way they explored or kicked off their gender explanation and
yep.
exploration. And for other people it did. And it's like, why must one side always be right? We don't, you know, how we come to sort of figure out where our genders are is so complex. I mean, you're up against all of this institutional bullshit all the time. So it's like I always said, like sex drive is big and it's a strong drive in a lot of people. So why shouldn't it play some
Yeah.
influence? Except that
In the
politics.
same sense, you're talking sex drive, that the actual the biological yum. There's fantasies. If your fantasy cannot be spoken about, if your fantasy cannot be given the the honor that is due because you spend so much time in your fantasy world, what the fuck? Why not? It's
I think it's Aaron Devore who talks about that idea that sexuality is not just like it's what you do, it's what you think you might want to do, and it's what you know you just want to think about, right? That's
Oh,
probably a
that's
badly
nice.
worded trifecta, but it's something like that he talks about in one of his books, and I've always thought that was useful because it's like there's a lot of people out there who've always, I mean, do we consider gay men who never acted on their gayness because they were in a closeted society not gay? Like, of course not, because they knew they were, or they knew they were attracted to men, but they didn't act on it. So I love the fact that that sort of brings together three different versions. And the more complex, I think, the conversations about sexuality, the better. So I very much appreciate the ACE movement for bringing in the difference between sexuality and romantic and sexual attraction, right? That's a distinction that I feel like the ACE community brought us that is was incredibly useful to me because that was when I went, oh my God, I fall in love with women and I tend to like having sex with men. Oh, bing, light bulb, right? So, and I think that's it's amazing how each sort of iteration of the movement brings new insights and brilliance and helpful ideas so that people can talk. Yeah. Um, okay. So I wanted to ask you specifically too. I know I mentioned the old trans conference circuit. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we met for the first time. You may not remember. You were a rock star. I was a baby kid at the time. You and Rachel actually had a long conversation when she was the artist formerly known as Betty, as I like to put it. Um, but I think it was at IFGE, if that rings
Okay.
any
Yep.
bells.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and that's
IFGE, International Foundation for Gender Equality. Uh, what was it called before that? It had been
your name. I forget.
Mariette Pathy Allen used to do all their magazine covers and
The magazine was Transgender Tapestry.
Tapestry. I think it was called Tapestry.
Tapestry. Yeah,
And
that
that
was.
wasn't transgender. It was cross dressers, and it was only cross dressing male to female. Let's put it that way. And that grew and expanded and broke its own roots. And watching that was really terrific.
I still get in trouble with
Don't
cross dressers.
getting
I'm
back to
sorry.
the you no no you I went off the subject here. You were talking about us meeting at that and me having a long conversation. Um, no, I don't remember any of that.
I'll see. I know there's a photo.
Don,
I know there's a photo of the two of you from years and years back. I'll
please.
see if I can dig it up if Rachel doesn't get mad at me for digging it up because
I'm
um
gonna guess long blonde hair and a leopard print tight dress.
I don't remember what she was still doing wigs at the time. Okay,
That's
I feel like
that
I'm gonna
was
stop
me.
talking about this. Oh, you, yes, of course. Though I think for me it's always the boots and the skinny jeans. So you're like tough biker chick femme is the best. So about the conferences, was there one that you remember going to first of those trans conferences? Which were, yes, a lot of the big fancy ones at hotels were cross dressers and I would say proto trans women, people who were maybe in the process of transitioning or about to transition, etc. So it was a good place, a good safe place, I think, for people to try on who they were in welcoming, sort of encouraging space,
Yeah,
and find resources and information. Again, before we had as much on the internet, you still had to go places to get information then. Um, but do you remember what your first trans conference was?
I used to go to monthly meetings of a cross-dressing support group. Me and another trans woman would go, and we were the ones in jeans and boots, and all the other folks who were attending were men who were wearing the most gorgeous, like fabulous outfits, and they were there smoking their cigars and talking about football and shit. And uh, but really, really enjoyed being dressed up, and it was a place where my pal and I could go and feel safe. And we were looked down upon. We weren't quite really supposed to be there, but they let us, is how it went. Oh, what was it called? Or something. 4G, 4A.
Not Trieste.
That was it.
That's awesome. Yes,
That was
Trieste.
it.
That was Virginia Prince's joint, right? She started. It was like Society for the Second Self is what the three S's stood for. If
I
I'm
never knew that.
Yeah, Trieste, the Society for the Second Self, which sounds so much cooler. It sounds like a Skull and Bones secret society more than a cross dressers club. But um, yeah, we were.
And she came up with the word transgender before anybody else. And I ran into her at a conference years later after Gender Outlaw had been published. And she ripped me a new one. You stole my word. Really, really, she yelled and yelled and yelled at me. Someone had to lead her away.
Wow.
She was very upset.
I
Yeah.
am sorry. Yeah, well that makes sense.
And
But
I felt
it's
bad because I did not credit her with that word, and it was her word. Um, I didn't use it the way she wanted to use it. She was saying it meant you live in another gender without any surgical or chemical.
she was a big liar. That also wasn't true. I mean, I have my own love-hate relationship with Virginia Prince. I've certainly took Trieste to task in the book at the time because they were both oddly transphobic and homophobic, which I still
Yep.
try to work out years later. Um, but yeah, she used it because she didn't want. She had breasts. She did that, but she didn't. I mean, this is all very public information. I'm not telling any stories, but she didn't want genital surgery. Um,
That was it. Okay.
yeah, and that was her whole thing. Is that at least in Richard Doctor? Was it Richard Doctor? Yeah, who wrote the a little biography of her talked about the fact that she was very turned on by trans porn, and so maybe her whole "it's not about sex," it was totally about you know. So
It
and I
was
would say like
autogynephilia. But speaking of words, we called ourselves transsexual. And way before transgender, I was transsexual for years and years. And because what we were doing, trans sex, that was our sex. We were changing it. And once we changed it, we were officially women. We changed our sex. And that made us women. And that was the way our minds worked in those days.
yeah, and that's why Virginia was using transgenderist is that she was had changed her gender, and in talking to James, he said, "Well, I never actually changed my gender." So transsexual was appropriate because I my gender's always been the same. I had to change the body to make the whole thing work the way it was, you know. So fascinating.
He's so articulate. My God.
Just national treasure and just I am always astonished by exactly how charming he is. Every single time
Mm.
I talk to him. He's just got that he's got that thing.
He used to
I
wear
was
that newsboy cap. Oh, he was so cute.
well we were talking about trans conference and he told a story about putting together the first big trans masculine, what at the time referred to as the big FTM conference,
FTM.
um, and having somebody say, uh, just a remarkable story. It's kind of been blowing me away since he told it to me, but somebody saying, wow, it's amazing. I've never seen this many trans men in a room. And someone else stopping and saying, that's because there's never been this many trans men in a room before. And that's like 95. Notes everywhere, but somewhere around 95, the first. And that's really an amazing, I mean, to me, that's to me, that's not that long ago. I know for young people it is, but 95 is like a blink ago, right? That's only 30 years at this point. The idea that that was the first time that there was a room full of trans men. I think that's
Yeah.
something now that younger people kind of take for granted, that of course you can find spaces where there's just a room full of trans guys, but it had never existed before, right? As far as we know.
No.
Um, so that's why I was curious. And I know you did, I'm guessing that you were at IFG to do the keynote that year. Um, and there were other places that we met, but I feel like we really met at Dark Odyssey more significantly, which was fascinating because of
Oh,
our friend
right.
Tristan. So
Oh, Dark Odyssey. My God. That had a good run. It
yes,
was
yes, it did. We missed the last few years because we'd moved out here and I was teaching, so it was never at a time that worked. But it was a cool thing.
There's now Camp Crucible,
Uh,
and Camp Crucible is really terrific. For those who are into essentially what's called kink now. We never called it kink. Kink embodied pretty much everything now, and the number of queer people at Camp Crucible, which started out to be a heterosexual BDSM group, has grown into you name it, whatever you want. There's littles, there's there's all kinds of cosplay, there's furries, there's ace camps. There's everybody goes to this Camp Crucible, and I would recommend it highly. I've been to a couple of those.
awesome. Um, that was that's the change. I know at the time with Dark Odyssey, the idea was to sort of bring some of the communities together, that there were the swingers who tended to be straight, and there were kink communities or leather communities that were straight, and there were, and then all the, so I feel like bringing the worlds together was one of the things that Dark Odyssey set out to do. But I feel like
Yeah.
that's also sort of a cultural moment that it's like, oh, of course it's all together now. But it had to happen. These were also sexual movements and communities. I mean, I'm now in Wisconsin, which apparently has the oldest contiguously running swinger scene in the United States. Uh, so I got myself invited. I found somebody to beard for me, and we went as a couple. But I'll tell that story another time. Anyway, it was
You
fun.
must.
It
You
was weird and
must.
fun, but
Did you do the thing with the keys in the fishbowl?
no, no,
Oh, all right, all right.
this was more this is more this it's more like a sex weekend. They do a hotel takeover so that people can swing naked
Oh,
at the trees.
okay,
People leave
okay.
their doors open so that you can kind of poke your head in and see if you're interested. It was a really fascinating thing. Um not definitely not my kind of scene, but it was very enjoyable to go to. So um
Love that.
yeah, it was cool.
Not mine
And just
either, but I wouldn't mind looking.
yeah, and just nice to know that it's like it's good to see people sort of pushing back against the puritanical bullshit too. It's like these folks have been organizing these for like 70 years or something. I'm like,
Mm,
yes. It just came to mind because as well, Fantasia Fair is celebrating its 50th. And I don't know if you've been to Fantasia Fair. I'm curious. Do you remember the one that's up in Provincetown?
no, I do know that, and I've never been.
Huh.
It was purely for a long time. It was purely cross dressing, and I never considered myself a cross dresser, so I figured I didn't belong, and so I never went.
So you really kind of talk about your gender as well as like I know that you had experiences certainly with like drag queens early on. So you did not come out of this. I mean, Rachel and I were oddly come into this world because the only people I could find online were the straight cross dressers and their wives. And it was very obvious from our first meetings that we did not fit that group at all. But it took us a while to sort of find everybody else, frankly. Always thankful to Tristan Taormino for that, because it was the connection with her that made that all work for us. But were there other places that you went, other conferences that you really enjoyed?
There for a while was like a series of drag king conferences that were just awesome. And the swag and the merchandise alone, the boxer shorts, that you could get. And the drag kings, it was comedy. It was like a weekend of comedy. And you go, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I got invited to one of them and to talk. And I went to another like 3 or 4 of them before they kind of faded out,
Mm.
just to be there.
Yeah,
It's great.
it's that's also a move where I'm like, where are the drag? There aren't enough drag kings. There's never enough drag kings to my liking, because I feel like we understand femininity as performative and performance, but we
You're
really
fading. You're whoa, 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 whoa.
are we back? No,
Yeah, yes,
okay,
no.
a little.
Is my voice
Yeah.
like in sync with my picture? Yeah.
Okay, let's give it a
Do you
second.
want to get off and get back on?
Let's see. I think we might be back, and I'll just cut out that couple of minutes.
Okay.
No?
Here I am talking. And if my voice is synced up with my mouth, then we're good. Your voice is synced up with your mouth,
Okay, so we just have a
which
couple of
knowing you, it always not always has been. But
um so no, I was just saying that I don't think there are ever enough drag kings. And I miss the early aughts in New York City where there were so many places you could go see.
you're frozen. You're frozen. You're frozen. You're frozen.